Good evening, everybody. This study session of the Board of Education for November 18th is called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PBS TV services website. Agenda, and as a notice, at agenda item number 4, the school improvement plans has been pulled from the agenda this evening and will be heard at a future date. So at this time, we will move ahead with public comment. Ms. Houston, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do. We have 5.
Okay.
Our first 2 speakers, Marisha Childs and Micah Gregonis.
Okay, well, people are coming up for public comment. I'll go ahead and read the instructions. Thank you for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments to the board. We value public input and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and reflections and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen and reflect on your comments. The board will not respond to any comments or questions during public comment, but we have asked Board Manager Roseanne Powell, who is seated over here in the front row, to follow up on issues raised during public testimony. Roseanne is available if you'd like to add additional information about how the board might respond. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. You have a total of 3 minutes. And please start by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of your testimony, a green light will come on right there in front of you. When you have 1 minute left, a yellow light will come on, and when your time is up, the red light will come on and a buzzer will sound, and we ask that you conclude your comments at that time. Thank you very much for being here, and we sincerely appreciate your comments and input. You may start anytime.
Okay, my name is Marisha Childs, and I'm speaking on Sackett. My husband and I have a daughter in kindergarten at Winter Haven. I attended the meeting last week, and I, like most parents in the room regarding Sackett, appreciate the work of Sackett. They were given a large task to do, and we appreciate the work. However, we, not just I, collectively feel the recommendation is unacceptable and the recommendation should be rejected. The reasons we feel it should be rejected may vary, but we feel it should be rejected. The Sackett member who remarked last week that she does not carry around baggage was incredibly insensitive. We all come from varied backgrounds, and that baggage she speaks of is what makes us whole people. That baggage is why we have streets named after our ancestors, and holidays, memorials, and museums. That baggage is our history, and Portland already has a very ugly history in its treatment of racial and ethnic minorities, and her remarks swung especially sharp with attendees and shows a lack of cultural competence, and apology should be forthcoming. When kindergarten roundup time is upon us, my husband and I did what most parents did. We went to the neighborhood schools, went to many other schools, and we chatted with many parents. And we ultimately decided that our child would go to Winter Haven. But when we filled out the form that the school's PPS sends out, we looked on the form for a place to indicate race or ethnicity. And noticed that there is no place to indicate that. And we noticed on PPS's website, they say that we strive to maintain gender and racial parity amongst the schools, but I don't really see how you can maintain a racial and gender parity if you don't ask for the race of the child. My husband called PPS and spoke to somebody at staff and asked, where do we indicate that on the form? And they said, we can't ask that, it's illegal. My husband and I are both attorneys, and we know that was absolutely incorrect, but there's no point in arguing with somebody on the phone about that. Like many parents, I have a younger child that would be starting PPS in the fall, and I'm concerned about the potential impact that these changes would have, not only about the weight-giving sibling preference in the current line reasons, but also for logistical reasons. But also, we're concerned about the impact it could have psychologically. If you speak with any child psychologist or therapist about the importance of keeping siblings together, they would tell you it's extremely important. I'm an attorney, and I work with youth in the juvenile dependency proceedings often. There are multiple siblings involved in any given case, and the big issues is always maintaining sibling contact. If a child can't be maintained in the home of origin, courts are always concerned about what's in the best interest of the child, and it's always of paramount importance for not only for family development, but for a child's development. Granted, it may be extreme examples, but the fact is important that to maintain siblings in the same school is important. Children want their siblings around for lunchtime, for recess, etc. Improving the diversity of schools is an important goal, but it overlooks the reality that Portland is not particularly a diverse community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's going to be hard to follow. My name is Micah Grigonis, Grigonis. I'm speaking also on behalf of the SACIT committee recommendations. I'm a parent of a child at Richmond, and we applied for our child to get in, our older child who is currently at Richmond to get in, with the understanding that our younger child would be able to also go there. And to me, it's sort of the same issue of you apply with the idea in mind that they would be able to continue all the way through 12th grade. And so getting rid of the sibling preference is similar in my mind to saying, well, we're going to cap it now at 8th grade, and then you have to figure out something to do later. That wasn't the deal that we applied under, and that deal in my mind is now changing. And there's a big blurb in the paperwork that you get from Richmond saying, now this is a big commitment. We want you to make sure that you go all the way through 12th grade. We realize, that Japanese is going to get hard, and it's a family thing, and you got to, be really committed to it, and that's what we're willing to do. And so having our second child now not being sure that she's going to be able to get in is just bringing back all those issues of, well, then where is she going to go, and where are we going to send her? Because like when our older son was ready for kindergarten, I went to 8 different parent nights for kindergartens. I went to my local neighborhood school. I went to several language immersion schools. I went to a few charter schools, and every other one other than my neighborhood school was standing room only. And there was, hundreds of parents in there. My neighborhood school, there was 12 parents. There was a sign on the door that said, "Don't bring firearms in the building." And one of the parents joked, "Well, do a lot of 3rd graders bring firearms?" And the principal said, "No, that's for the parents." And I thought, okay, well, I can't send my kids here. Like, I don't feel safe sending my children to this school. And so I'm just saying, like, it just seems like it's not a very well thought out proposal. There's a lot of, I've sent you guys all emails about my thoughts about it, and I'll continue to do that, but there's a lot of things that I think that just aren't very well thought out with it, so.
Okay.
For instance, like the SACIT board member that was saying, well, we don't know why people want to transfer from neighborhood to neighborhood. Well, you could ask them. Like, you don't have to demolish the whole system to find out why people want to transfer. You could simply ask them. You know who they are. Things like, well, Richmond's not a 50-50 language immersion program. Well, you could make it one. There are enough Japanese language speakers in Portland, I imagine, to fill half the spots.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Our next 2 speakers, Nicole Eroz-Eliardo and Toby Rates.
Scott Community, stand up. I don't know where the other person is. My name is Nicole Eroz-Elardo, IROZ-ELARDO, and I'm here representing the Scott School parent community. Scott School K-8 is a diverse community in Northeast Portland, and over 89% of our children qualify for free and reduced lunch. Over 80% are kids of color. Over half speak Spanish in their home, and we have significant Somali and Vietnamese populations. Our principal recently informed our community she is returning to her home state in December. Dr. Gutierrez initiated several programs over the past 4 years to increase academic performance and change the general climate of the school. Most visible is our dual Spanish language immersion program, but the performance of that inaugural class, now 2nd graders, is very promising. But our CAP details other programs such as instructional strategies like guided language acquisition design, assessment strategies such as DRA to fine-tune reading instruction, and behavioral support such as the Rite of Passage program for our boys of color. So we thank Dr. Gutierrez for her service, for putting us on this path, and wish her well. We also appreciate the support of the board in helping us get to this point. As a community, we're starting to see change, good, equitable change that supports all of our children, and we want to know that our next leader will support and build upon these initiatives. We have great confidence in our current teachers and in staff to continue. The PTA supports the interim placement that began today if doing so results in authentic, timely engagement with parents to ensure the selection of an experienced administrator appropriate to our diverse community. PPS Policy 5.6.60.017 and the Administrative Directive 5.60.016 require, quote, meaningful participation in the principal selection process by representatives of the community, including staff, parents, community members, and students. These directives state clearly that parents should be meaningfully involved in both the selection criteria and the selection of the principal. Let me repeat that again, the selection criteria and the selection of the principal. Yet recent practice reveals that PPS administrators find parental engagement messy and ignore it during the hiring process. We are here to ask you to reverse that trend and follow board policy. Parental leadership at Scott is committed to bridging cultural and linguistic differences among our families in all important school matters, including this one. The PTA will begin with deep engagement, starting with tomorrow's PTA meeting and the Friday morning meeting following that. We're willing to do our part, but we need your help. On top of linguistically appropriate outreach, we ask for authentic and timely engagement from PPS staff. Our parents have limited electronic communication options, limited access to personal vehicles, unpredictable work schedules. We need time to give this input. Our children deserve a permanent principal who's prepared to be an academic, administrative, and community leader, someone with expertise in dual language immersion, who supports current programs, is committed to equity, and has experience in very diverse populations. And we ask you to commit to having an exemplary engagement process to make that happen.
Thank you very much.
Our last speaker is Richard Greenstead.
Richard Greenstead, Greensteed. Superintendent Smith and the board, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. My family and I have been in our neighborhood school since 2008. Chief Joseph Elementary was a school with an amazing community. Then 2 years ago, the Jefferson Cluster enrollment balancing started. Our school was threatened. The proposal to merge with Ockley Green made me furious. Ockley had a reputation in my community. In the days and weeks that followed, I said horrible things about failing schools. I advocated to emulate great schools, not tear them apart. It became time for action to ensure change did not occur. When I reflect back, I see where I was wrong. I wasn't interested in finding solutions for Ockley Green. I was stuck in the me and I, trying to save my school. Today I am embarrassed about the comments I made about failing schools. I owe the Ockley Green community an apology. I have learned that my perceptions were wrong. My child's education has not suffered. It has flourished. Both my kids love their merged school. They have grown as individuals as a result of the process. In its first year, Chief Joseph Ockley Green has achieved level 4 status in academic growth. The investment that Chief Joseph Ockley Green received must proliferate to every neighborhood school. We must have strong leadership in every neighborhood school. And we must provide that leadership with the supports needed to succeed. Academic growth and success for all students is possible through this investment. As members of the PPS community, we have a moral obligation to stand up for all students. I hope every parent at every school will honestly analyze the role they play in the greater system. Sackett was tasked with helping bring enrollment and transfer in alignment with the racial education equity policy. Superintendent Smith, thank you for acknowledging the issue and looking for solutions. I commend Sackett's work and their dedication to the task at hand. A stacked deck against the very students the racial education equity policy is trying to help cannot continue. I urge you to make the tough decisions in the coming weeks. Sitting in those seats requires that you vote the we and our. The difficult work will start after those tough decisions are made. We must follow up with strong, and I mean truly strong, parent engagement to address community needs due to changes. We must provide the investment. The investment must include strong leadership at every school and a 2015-16 budget proposal that addresses parent concerns. Equity and excellence can and will coexist. Please join the focus on the we and our.
Thank you, Mr. Greenstead. It's not often we have someone who comes up and testifies like you did, so thank you very much. Okay, moving on in our agenda. Last week, the board heard a report on enrollment and transfer recommendations from the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer. Tonight, the superintendent will present her timeline on those recommendations. Superintendent Smith, would you like to go ahead?
Okay, you have PowerPoint going up? Yes, and what I'm doing tonight is walking you through the proposed timeline. So I'll wait for me to get this up on the screen. Yeah, go ahead and stick it. Or I will take that. Okay, so board members received a memo, and I'm going to walk you through what two different memos. One was a flow chart that goes through the SACIT recommendations and identifies of the 6 recommendations that SACIT made, which ones require policy changes from the board and which ones would require some kind of board approval. And since that print is very small, I'm going to walk people through just so that you hear, like it's trying to pick apart what actions actually are required from each of the recommendations. And what I said in my memo to the board is that I'm still considering which of any of these I will recommend to move forward. So a lot of what the staff is now doing is looking at what it actually takes to operationalize any of these. What are the things that, if in fact we make the recommendation, we could operationalize by the next enrollment and transfer cycle, which are more elaborate and would require more than that in order to do, so could end up being things we'd consider for the next enrollment and transfer cycle. And some of these don't require policy change. They're things that would be budget or operational considerations. So the first recommendation from SACIT was to end the lottery transfers to, between neighborhood schools. That would require a policy change. So the first column says yes, policy changes. And would it require board approval? Yes. The second recommendation from SACIT was a proposal to enhance the petition transfer process. So this would be utilizing petition to do neighborhood transfer as opposed to the lottery being used as the mechanism for neighborhood to neighborhood. Does that require a policy change? No. But does it require board approval? Not board approval, but if in fact it takes dollars to actually implement it, so budget considerations would come before the board. Third one was to conduct a focus option review. This is something that was already included in an existing policy, so it does not require policy changes by the board. And is board approval required? No, not to actually do a review. It may require additional staff capacity in order to actually do what's required as part of the policy to conduct the review. The fourth recommendation was to support dual language immersion expansion. Does that require a policy change? No. Does it require board approval? Yes. And this would be specifically if additional dual language programs are cited in the district, then it comes back to the board, and the dual language immersion process department is already leading that process. So we're actually already in a due diligence process on the next set of proposed dual language immersion programs. The fifth one was to do changes to the focus option lottery. That does require a policy change. And is board approval required? Yes. New policy language would require a board approval. If the proposals are more about improving outreach and support and expanding the applicant pool, that is not. That's a procedure, and it's something that the staff can just do. The last one, special education changes. Does it require policy change? Yes. So there's the specific policy that's identified that would need change. And does it require board approval? Yes, the new policy language requires board approval. However, it's also changes that are part of the strategic plan for the special education department. So some of these are more about service delivery model, and some are about, would require policy change. So that's essentially what's the framework that I'm using to then look at what I come back with as recommendations to the board. So timeline, I'm looking.
Carol?
Yes.
Can I
Yeah.
just interject? Because all this is absolutely correct, except we're missing the number one recommendation out of SACIT, which, and I informed the SACIT member the other day that they buried the lead. And so the number one recommendation is basically in a paragraph on the third page, 2 paragraphs above this chart, which they say our number one recommendation is make sure that the neighborhood schools are performing to the degree that they should, and to have consequences if they don't. So I would like you to consider that. I mean, I think we should include this in this chart, and you clearly have some recommendations on how to make that happen. So we should account for that.
Okay, and one of the things that was discussed at SACIT are the multiple levers and what are the different things we have that impact the success of a school. Which some of the things that you're speaking of are beyond the scope of SACIT's actual recommendations. So effective principal, accountability, I mean, there's a whole framework by which we're looking at how do we have successfully performing schools. The specific recommendations in front of us right now are about changes to the enrollment transfer policy. So it's a limited scope of recommendation. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Point taken, gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, but SACIT addressed things that are way beyond what the scope of their
Well,
enrollment and
it's-
transfer policy, yeah.
It's the whole cloth in my view.
I totally gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so the actual changes to the enrollment and transfer system, on November 25th, which is our next board meeting, I will bring back recommendations to the school board, including the components which would require support in the next, the 15-16 budget, and which would require policy change by the board. So, and ones that are specifically intended to impact the next enrollment and transfer cycle. So actual proposal will come back to the next meeting. On December 2nd, which is the next board meeting, I'm recommending that the board hold an open hearing to provide members of the community an opportunity to give feedback on those recommendations, and then also to provide the opportunity to submit comments in writing and online. December 9th board meeting would come back with policy language and a draft resolution for the first reading by the board. At that time, the board would also hear additional public comment. The January 6th meeting, again, more opportunity for public comment. And then at the January 13th board meeting, a second reading of the enrollment and transfer policy changes and potential board resolution for official board action. This particular deadline would allow that any changes that we actually are approved by the board could be implemented for the 2015 open enrollment opportunity. So, and it allows us to operationalize those. So, there you go. Thank you.
Carol, where's the sibling preference? Is that focus option lottery changes?
It's
Is
in the
that where that
focus
is?
option lottery changes, right?
Okay. It'd probably be good if we just called it right out there so that people weren't trying to figure out where it is.
Yes.
Okay. All right, board members who have questions. Dr. Buell?
Comments and questions, I assume. This timeline just seems to me, A, to be extremely fast, but B2B, very sketchy. It has one meeting, there's this massive change that we're looking at, and I came from a district where I worked the last 10 years where they had the change that we're contemplating. And so I have some idea of how it actually works. I think we should have at least 3 major public meetings, and those public meetings should allow for dialogue, because a lot of times what we've done in the past is we have allowed people to come and talk, but we don't allow ourselves to ask questions. And we should have not only some SACIT members there to answer questions, we should have the full board, we should just have a dialogue with people about what this means and so forth. And it just seems to me like this is too sketchy. We just saw the public comment and what it is at our regular meetings. So public comment, which if you don't come to a lot of board meetings, you might look at this and go, oh yeah, public comment, yeah, 6 people, you can't ask questions, you can't talk, you're limited, and so forth and so forth. So I'd suggest that we actually have large public meetings at maybe one at Madison, one at Roosevelt, one at Wilson. And we have ones where we allow people to come and we're allowed to ask questions and dialogue, and SACIT members can comment and ask questions and so forth. So we actually we look at this in and give it the importance that it actually really deserves. So I have no problem with what you have, except that I just think we need as a board to have much more extensive communication to and from the.
And that's part of the point of having the dialogue tonight. So the one on December 2nd, the recommendation here is to hold that as a public hearing. So it's a regularly scheduled board meeting that you'll all be available, but that recommendation is to do it as a hearing. And your opportunity tonight is to say you could make these all hearings. You could keep them as regular public comment. You could do unlimited public comment. So that's exactly the discussion you're having here tonight. And if in fact you get to the end of this time period, that would be the time period that allows us to operationalize it in this enrollment and transfer cycle, then we're not there and you're bumping it to next year. So what I'm defining for you is the window that lets us operationalize it for the next cycle.
I think another piece too, in agenda setting, we'll need to look at what other topics and issues are coming up on the upcoming meetings among our other priorities. So that's another piece. I guess what I would suggest is that we take folks' thoughts and reactions similar to Director Buell's, hear them tonight, and then Pam and I and Carol and staff can take that and then kind of weigh that and figure out how that fits in with the other pieces that we're trying to address in the next several meetings, if that's agreeable to folks.
Other comments, questions?
Well, yeah, I'll say that that we want to make sure. So Carol, this is a great start, and then I will reiterate. I think SACIT's recommendations bury the lead, and we ought to talk about their number 1 recommendation, and I'd like to get input from you on steps so that we can get there. And leadership is a huge thing, and then we've talked about that in our in the board. So following up on that would be good. But from a process standpoint, we want to make sure that we do it right, and we've had a lot of experiences where we haven't done things right, and we've learned. So my one request would be is just to kick the ball back to you and work with John and the communications team and what we've learned from past experiences that we don't want to repeat, what we've learned from working with PSU that we want to maybe roll out in this. So yeah, I think we want to make sure that the process is done correctly on this. But I appreciate the timeline as well.
I think it would be helpful for us when we're in agenda setting to hear exactly what you consider doing it right. That would be helpful. Steve gave us a good idea of his right. What does your right look like, Tom?
It is.
There's only one right in there.
No, you never know.
Well, I'm not the pro at this, so
Right. But what would it look like to you?
To me, it would. when PSU came here and sat here and said, we're gonna reach 40% of the people, or we're not going to consider it done correctly, I thought that was a highly aggressive, and directionally positive way to talk about things. And so doing it right is setting an aggressive target on how we're going to reach out to all the people in our district and making it happen.
Do you have any suggestions on reaching out?
Yeah, I'd like to hear John Isaac's suggestions on it. I mean, this is,
Right, I'm just,
yeah.
I mean, you commented about doing things right, so I was just assuming you had some specific ideas about
Well, I
how to
just
do
said, set a target and hit it
that. Okay.
in terms of people that we, and I think 40% is highly aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I could ask Tom, did you
Go
like,
ahead.
did you like at least having 3 major public meetings? Would you be in favor of that? I mean, as basically a minimum?
Well, those are, now you're defining meetings versus how many people you're actually reaching.
Well, I'm just defining opportunity for people to comment on that part. I don't have any
People commenting
trouble
is a good
with going
thing.
beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments? Director Regan?
So first of all, I wanted to apologize, especially to Sackett, that I wasn't here last week to actually hear the report in person. I have an elderly aunt in Southern California who needed attention, so my sister and I flew down there. So I have listened to the entire board meeting from last week, so I think I'm up to speed. But I just wanted to acknowledge that first. Yeah, I would love to have opportunity for some interaction with our community related to these recommendations. I certainly would not want to have public comment at these meetings limited to 6, comments. We need to open that up. And I would certainly want us to have an opportunity to have discussion at the end, maybe, of the public comment. One of the things that we did really effectively in the past has been listening sessions with our community. We did it around superintendent searches, and we've done it around when we lost the bond in 2011. And those seemed to be pretty effective because while we were sort of hearing from folks, we did it in a way that was not sort of one person coming and testifying. It was an environment that felt a little warmer than that somehow. But we also, at the end, reflected back what we heard. And whether we agree with it or not, I think it really helped the community realize that we heard what they said. So maybe a listening session kind of format, or maybe even a town hall kind of format. We've been doing some town halls. We have a little bit of experience at it now. Whether we could maybe do a town hall related to the Sackett recommendations, and maybe even invite some of the Sackett committee members to, help us with that. So just want to throw out a couple of those ideas.
Others? Greg?
Just mention. I said I wanted to say something. I didn't have planned what I was going to say. I think from my time since I've been on the board, enrollment and transfer policy has been an issue. People have recognized it as inequitable. And what I think I hear, Tom, you saying, my words, not yours, obviously, and you may not align these two, but what I hear you say is a process more similar to what we're doing with district-wide boundary review, which sets aggressive targets, has a year-long process.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay. Can you clarify then? Is
Yeah,
it a shorter?
I'm saying let's use that. Let's just for sake of, let's just say that's the best in class for that particular topic, and it may or may not be, but I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Then what is the best in class for this topic in this timeline, and let's hit it.
So you're still asking for us to meet this timeline to have it in place for enrollment transfer?
I don't, that would be ideal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I get, that's the part I.
Yes, that would be ideal.
That's the part I struggle with, is that right now PSU is looking to help us get this done in a year, and we're feeling like it's pressure to do it in less than a month and a half. I think is the challenge from my standpoint. My guess is that PSU or somebody that does this to say, if you want deep penetration, and since there are changes proposed for every school, because neighborhood to neighborhood transfer will affect every school, not just sibling preference for focus option, it would require an outreach comparable to what I imagine district-wide boundaries, because that too will touch. So again, that's how I process it. So I think Sackett has done a great job of reaching out. They have not spoken to every school. They have not spoken with every school or every focus option that would be affected by this. Their charge wasn't, my understanding was that that wasn't even part of their charge, but was to view our policy in regards to our racial equity policy. And so they gave us some reflections on what that was, and we can decide whether to accept those or not, or to go through another process.
Right, they weren't charged with,
Right.
with that, but we are.
Um,
We're charged with a process to make sure that it hits the mark before we make a decision that's highly consequential.
Perhaps, I mean, we made the charge about how much outreach we want to do. Again, I've been hearing for the 3 years that I've been on the board that this policy has been a problem. Sackett has been working on it for quite some time. So I guess I'm just saying that I know this will be characterized as I'm not interested in public outreach or public input, but I think they have done the work, and I'm comfortable moving forward. And I don't know about you all, but I'm hearing lots from our community about these proposals, and it's probably certain communities more than others. So I am intentionally trying to reach out to folks who may not be aware of it. So I appreciate the timeline, and I'm comfortable with the timeline, and I appreciate the ideas that we
So
can.
you don't want to change any process, and just so I can understand, you're saying what Carol's laid out's fine, and we can't do a better process than this.
I didn't say we can't do a better process. I bet after we do district boundary review, we could do a better process. As I think I've heard you say actually just last night, we can always do better, right? There's no perfect. So I couldn't say that we couldn't do a better process, but I appreciate what Director Buell's saying about saying, can we make sure our hearings are more open so we get to hear that? And I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. Other comments from the board, or Carol, did you have something you
Just
wanted
I was
to add
gonna
here?
add, I mean, a couple things. You've got leeway in here of, in the time frame to be able to implement this in the next cycle. These could be two-way hearings, they could be town halls, they can be, I mean, you guys are deciding how to use those times. And then the other thing listed on here is an electronic survey, which is another way that people can communicate, which is yet to be developed, but is one of the things listed on here. So we're including that as a way that we're intending to reach people and solicit feedback, and in writing. And I will say, we've already received feedback from probably a stack this big of people who have already written in from what they know so far. So it's even responding, like it's generated, people that have strong feelings about this are reaching out and communicating to us. So like, I'm believing we're getting a bunch of feedback
And I-
organically. How's that?
I think it's fair to say that it's hard to schedule 7 people and a student representative in the period of time. So while I appreciate us thinking about doing anytime, right, doing these during our Board of Education meetings, and I would agree with the one on December 2nd. I think that, we can have other meetings in here where we have, like, all of the suggestions that everybody's had for ways that we could reach out to the community. But I think that we generally, as a board, are pretty realistic about the fact that we have to move ahead, and if all of us can't be there, hopefully the people who can't make it are reviewing the record, and if we have enough of these, hopefully everybody will get an opportunity to go to something to hear what the public has to say. So I'm sure Ruth and I will be telling staff that it's not critical that we are everybody here is at every single meeting. So I'm sure we can figure out a way within all this to find ways to reach out to the community and have everybody have an opportunity to talk to us publicly. And then, as Carol said, we're all receiving lots and lots of emails from people, and we appreciate those as well. Don't always get a chance to answer everybody, but definitely are hearing what they're saying, so. Greg?
I just wanted to say, and I'm happy to meet as frequently as I'm available and
Yes.
as often. So if people want to have more meetings, I'm happy to do that.
Director Atkins?
I think the piece too, particularly of dialogue and with staff and with SACIT members and us, to have that opportunity. So yes, we definitely want to be able to hear from the community. I'll be hearing from many folks, do more outreach to hear from those we haven't heard from yet would be great as well. But just to make sure that we do have that opportunity, and what I'm seeing in the schedule is that we would. And again, to me, always with these questions where there are no easy answers, we're balancing the need to move forward and make changes and make things better in the district with the need to make sure that folks have an opportunity to weigh in, whether they agree or disagree or whatever. So we're always balancing that, and I do feel, given the length of time that this has been been an issue that has been called out as one we need to address, the length of time that SACIT has been working on this and deliberating and really wrestling in depth with this, we need to move forward. Now we'll see what the superintendent comes back in terms of, what portions of recommendations, how she wants to move forward. And then that'll also, I think, give us an indication too of, what are we dealing with here, and are there pieces that are some less controversial than others that we can absolutely move forward? Are there others we need to pause and have additional conversation about? We'll see how that goes. But to me, it's still that we need to move this forward. This has been a topic of conversation, and again, recognized as an issue that needs to be dealt with for quite some time. So I appreciate hearing folks' input. I don't know if Director Morton or Mina want to weigh in too, but we'll definitely take that and then weigh that and mapping out the next meetings coming up.
Mina, do you have thoughts about student outreach? Are you working on this through SuperSAC? Or could you make it a topic?
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely reach out through SuperSAC. SuperSAC is well connected if we wanted to. That's definitely an option. And I think that students have a voice, but I also know that SACIT has had a student representative on it, so I'm confident that Marty Berger has provided a great voice on it. So I'm pretty happy with the student outreach on it, just because I know Marty also has brought it back to SuperSAC in the past year, and we've discussed it.
Great, thank you. Matt, anything from you?
Yeah, I think thank you for asking. I think we know that the more information, the better. The more information we have, the better decision theoretically we're going to make. So I'm certainly open to having more meetings, more opportunity to hear information. And I do appreciate, as Director Regan mentioned, the not the town hall, but the sort of listening session format, because that was more of a conversation, and it's in fact, I think we used a similar format as we were preparing for the Jefferson cluster enrollment conversation too. So that brought out a lot of good information that ended up going into decisions. I think the other thing we have to realize too, though, is that I think the timeline is the timeline, and the recommendations aren't going to change. We just have to make a decision based on what has been recommended, and if there are any tweaks that we would like to see happen. I think finally the only thing is, I don't think all of us are ever going to agree on how much information is enough information.
Right.
And we're going to have to make a decision that we've met a critical mass, and we need to move forward because the timeline is what it is.
Right.
So.
Dr. Buell.
Where are we planning, Superintendent Smith, in your timeline here to discuss things like number one, SACIT representation, and lottery transfers to neighborhood schools, something that I'm pretty much in favor of, number one. Do we end it So everybody goes back to their neighborhood schools? When do we discuss those issues? Do we grandfather anybody in? Does everybody goes back to their neighborhood schools starting
So this
next September 1st?
So this is what I'll bring you.
No, I'm talking about.
I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
So this is what I will bring you on the 25th, and part of, so we've got a large amount of policy, which addresses grandfathering and how do you get from here to there. I'm gonna bring you the entire policy and tell you which pieces of it I'm recommending change in.
So what,
So-
and how are you getting the community input into your recommendation?
I'm gonna bring you something, and then we'll hear back from people about, does it hit the mark or does it not? I mean, so part of what I'm gonna do is a red line of our current policy, taking recommendations from SACIT, considering which ones I'm gonna recommend change in, but I'll bring you the whole policy, so you'll be able to see exactly, and people will be able to respond by what they see. Either it hits it or it doesn't. And we'll be in dialogue through this entire period of time, and we'll either be someplace in time that we can implement it for this next enrollment and transfer cycle, or we'll realize it's a much larger conversation, and we want to take the next year being in it. So like, or as Ruth just said, we'll take some piece of it. So I will address that specifically when I bring it forward next week. But your question about, will we
When-
grandfather? That's part of what I'll bring you next week.
So that's going to be, and when we decide to do that, then is the part that's you've got by January 13th, accepting these without the details or with the details?
No, I'm bringing you the policy.
The
change.
details,
Yeah.
and then we're going to take those details out, and we're going to say to everybody in the city of Portland, for instance, guess what, next year you're going back to your neighborhood school. Let's say that was
That's
the
not the
detail.
current
And then we would have one meeting for people to come forward to discuss all of that, plus all of these changes, plus all the focus option lottery changes,
No.
and all those things in one meeting. Because I'm kind of opposed to doing it in the board meetings. I think I sat through that negotiations process and where we almost shut the whole district down. I don't really want to shut the board down at the beginning of the budget committee to do this. That's why I'm suggesting that we have at least 3 full community input, discussion, dialogue, open up that around this, because I think the minute we hit the detail, you're not gonna just see these people here.
Oh, no, we'll hear from people.
I hope we hear from
I mean, it's
most of
gonna
the
be,
public.
yeah, all
Right.
over, and we need to have space to allow those people to come forward and make their comments and do stuff, so when the policy, we end up voting on the policy, that we end up going, we did offer people the chance to hear, and we did really truly listen, and we demonstrated that. Even if we're getting a lot of emails, nobody sees emails I'm getting. They're almost all from Richmond anyhow. There's a handful of them, but they're,
We're
I mean,
getting-
I'm getting.
we're all getting-
Please
we're all
quit
getting
sending me emails.
them. We're all getting them.
Yeah, I know, I mean, but,
Yeah,
you
we're
see what I'm
getting-
saying? I just think it takes more than, and so the reach out that Mr. Curler is talking about here is done around those 3 meetings. So we reach out to everybody in the district and say, here, we're having these meetings, you're welcome to come. That's Tom's outreach that we put together. That's my way of thinking about it. So we can reach 40%, we can reach 100% of our, basically, we have a method to reach pretty close to 100% of it.
So that's exactly what we've been talking about here, Steve.
Good.
So thank you very much for summarizing it for us.
Well,
Okay.
so I'll look forward to those 3 meetings.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we're taking everybody on the board's, we're taking everybody on the board's thoughts into consideration.
No, and I
Not just one
appreciate- I
person,
appreciate
so
the process.
that's why we're all here tonight. That's what we're having the conversation about, so it's all good.
It's all-
Okay, any other comments? Okay, great. In that case, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Tonight, we'll receive the recommendations from staff regarding a proposed 2016 school building improvement bond ballot measure. Here we go again. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this item? Very exciting.
I would. So CJ Sylvester, who is our Chief of School Modernization, is going to provide the report. And the staff recommendations are what you're going to hear tonight, which are based on the work of our Bond Development Committee. And I'll be coming back to you next week with a final recommendation on the proposed 2016 bond measure.
Good evening.
Please. Good evening, CJ Sylvester, Chief of School Modernization for Portland Public Schools. This is sounding a little weak to me. In the existing 2012 School Building Improvement Bond Program, there are funds available to provide high school planning in preparation for subsequent consideration of another capital ballot measure in 2016. Tonight is intended for board discussion about the recommendation that staff has provided. Based on board input tonight, the superintendent's recommendation will come before you at next week's meeting for action. It is not until 2016 that the board will actually review then current assessed values, possible tax rates, community attitudes, and ultimately make decisions about whether to move forward a proposed capital bond ballot measure for November of 2016. In 2012, a creative and innovative 32-year plan and program was identified to fund the full modernization or replacement of our aged school infrastructure. This plan is primarily pay-as-you-go in order to ensure that maximum dollars are being expended on learning environments and not on interest payments. Last spring, the superintendent convened a bond development committee. This committee met 5 times over 6 months to develop their recommendation to the superintendent. Stakeholders included not only 3 members of the board of directors, but interested parties from the city of Portland, our Portland Our Schools, unions, citizen activists, a state representative, PTA, program partners, parent leaders, Latino Network, higher education, general contractors, and as well as that, there was crossover with some of those members from the 2012 Bond Development Committee, as well as the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. The committee reviewed current bond projects, facilities conditions, the nature and extent of competing priorities based on those facility conditions, equity, the very real issue of political support, the value of capital and program partnerships, and tax rate and inflationary cost considerations. The survey results from August reviewed by the committee are worth noting. They indicate that half of the survey respondents are familiar with the 2012 bond program. Of those people, 69% feel positive about the bond and the projects that are being funded. For any contemplated 2016 bond, the following top 3 priorities for funding were identified. First, urgent facility needs, followed by benefiting the most disadvantaged students and the most crowded schools. The recommendation is to continue the plan of rebuilding and modernizing high schools first, and to include 3 high schools in each of the next 2 bonds previously identified for 2016 and 2020. In each of the next 2 bonds, include 2 comprehensive high schools and 1 focus option high school. And complete master planning 3 high schools by fall 2016 in preparation for any potential November 2016 capital bond ballot measure. In order to complete this master planning with full community participation, dedicate the $1.5 million in 2012 school building improvement funds to the recommended 3 high schools for master planning purposes. In the 2012 ballot measure explanatory language, we said we would, quote, also begin planning for upgrade of all high schools in coming years, end quote. The facilities visioning and high school education specification work efforts to date meet this requirement. The 3 high schools identified for 2016 consideration are Benson Polytechnic, Lincoln, and Madison High Schools. The 3 high schools identified for 2020 consideration are Jefferson Middle College and Cleveland and Wilson High Schools. The committee ultimately prioritized facility condition, including overcrowding, and improving facilities for the highest number of historically underserved students as the highest criteria. Benson is the district's only career technical education focus option and has significant seismic retrofit needs. Benson also has about 80% of its students in the combined underserved category. You may remember that combined underserved is a state-identified category that includes economic status, race, English language, learning, and special education considerations. Lincoln High School is by far the district's most overcrowded high school building. We have exhausted all in-building options for managing its enrollment. An example of this is the fact that the cafeteria has been converted into classrooms for educational use. Madison has a poor facility condition, and 77% of its students are in the combined underserved category. The committee also noted that both Benson and Lincoln offer immediate, unique partnership potential. So again, the schedule is that tonight there's board discussion and input about the elements of the recommendation, that next week the board adopts resolution as amended if appropriate based on the conversation tonight. But it's not until 2016 that the Board of Education reviews what are then assessed values inside the district, possible tax rates, the political climate, how the community's feeling, and decides whether or not to actually move forward with any potential ballot measure in November of 2016. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions? Director Buell?
The number one response category says spending should go to the most urgent facility priorities, such as unsafe school buildings and leaking roofs, but that, we didn't go with that, right? We decided that the number one thing should be the 3 high schools?
No, actually,
Or is that-
some of the criteria that was used to identify the 3 high schools is facility condition.
In that condition.
And
okay.
then the 3 high schools themselves don't necessarily mean that that's the only thing that would be in any potential 2016 bond ballot measure.
Similar to the one this time.
We have, that's exactly right, we have urgent facility needs that we're addressing at up to 63 other schools as part of the 2012 ballot measure that we call our summer improvement projects. And I would anticipate that in fact those same types of urgent facility needs would be addressed in any subsequent bond measures up until such a time as the entire portfolio of schools has been completely modernized and retrofitted.
Now this bond, would this double what you're paying now for a period of 4 years? Because we have it's 8 years before it drops, right? This bond goes out 8 years before it drops, and then it has another tail of 12 more years?
Well, let me go back here to the financing plan and program. So we've got 8 years that is essentially pay as you go, and then we have a tail for an additional 12 years.
Uh-huh.
What has always been contemplated, and the reason we call this the subway tile version is because of the way it lays out, is that there would be one more increase in tax rate with the second bond, and that with subsequent bonds, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they would simply be renewals of existing tax rates. So what that tax rate is going to be is a decision that the board in 2016 will make in deciding whether or not to go forward and with what tax rate.
So the second bond, the 2016 one, because I wasn't around when we were talking about all this stuff, the second bond would go with, if we contemplated where we were thinking at the beginning of the first bond,
Right?
would that go then, would that double the tax rate, and then that doubled tax rate would stay, or would it double the tax rate and then drop after a period, and then that tax rate would stay? What was our contemplation around it?
What I can show you up here is that the original one, based on the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee recommendation to the board and board adoption, was that we go out strong with high schools and that we go for a larger amount, which included that 30-cent tail there that you're looking at. And so that tax rate is $1.10 per 1,000 value, assessed value. What it was contemplated at that time was that potentially the next one would be 90 cents per 1,000. So it's not doubling, it would be something less than that based on what was originally contemplated. And that tax rate then would be a total of $2 per 1,000, the $1.10 from the 2012 bond, 90 cents from the 2016, and that would remain stable over the balance of the 32-year plan and program. So that tax rate is what would remain intact.
So the $2 per 1,000 would remain intact over
Correct.
the 30 years. Okay, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Other questions or comments? Director Atkins?
Thanks so much. So thanks to the committee and everyone who worked on this. I guess just maybe some from the board members who participated in the committee, any thoughts on, I mean, I know that there's a case to be made for every single building in this district needing work. So like on the original bond, Cleveland had been on that one, it was not on this one. Just maybe a little bit more of some of the thought process. Again, every building is deserving and needs the work, but it just would be helpful to hear a little bit more of that.
I can give you what I remember of the conversations, and I think Director Curler and Director Regan were also, so please jump in if I'm forgetting something. So at this stage, there are a couple of things, is that originally when we went out with Bond 1, the community came to a consensus to start with high schools.
Right.
Primarily, well, for a number of different reasons, but partly because it would eliminate the chance that it would eliminate the opportunity for your child to be in 2 remodeled buildings at any time during your K-12 education. So if we worked backwards from 9 through 12, people wouldn't have their middle school remodeled and then go to a remodeled, or then also
You're talking
have
about
their
the
high school.
disruption rather than
Right,
the
the
benefit
disruption,
piece.
right.
Yeah.
So there was some discussion, but then eventually consensus of saying that let's stick with that plan to stay with high schools. And so then there was a discussion about which high schools. And we are at a point, as you were pointing out, that the facilities condition index is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 points away from each other.
Right.
But when we're talking those levels, it's indistinguishable. They're all in need.
Right.
And so that moved us on to which ones made the most sense. And there was a lot of discussion about which ones made most sense. There was caution. There was a lot of folks who wanted Jefferson to be part of this, primarily to show the commitment and investment from the district, as it's been meddled with a number of times. Ironically, it also is showing great growth academically, and so there was not an interest in disrupting that. We didn't want to mess with something when it's headed in the right direction, if I'm remembering the conversation correctly. But that there was still a strong commitment and a belief that as it continues to grow, that perhaps it would need a different size facility than if we rebuilt it now.
Right.
So that left some other high schools. There was interest in Benson, primarily again facilities condition index, but opportunity for partnership, but also again as you saw, a highly diverse student population that's succeeding. And a belief that it will help catalyze some of the CTE for the district. And then, like I'm thinking you asked specifically about Cleveland. Cleveland was at one point in the mix because it had a significant roof work that needs to be done, and it's a big roof. Not as big as Wilson's, I don't think, but similar. And so there was discussion about should we do the roof and then have to come back and rebuild it later. And our understanding is that much of the roof work actually can be maintained because it's a historic structure. There's some diaphragmatic and pieces that will be, even if we do it now, it won't be all lost. But there was a discussion about the overcrowding at Lincoln. There was some safety concerns about downtown, that they're currently using portables. And then there was also some interest in, again, all the facilities, the conditions were an issue. But that Madison is a growing area, and a worry about if we did something like Madison, Cleveland, Benson, there are some issues about geographic equity that concern some folks. So again, there are many considerations in this,
That's helpful.
but that's primarily what I remember the discussion. I don't know, Director Regan or Director Curler, if there's anything you would add.
No, other than it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it is. So,
And all those buildings are in need.
yeah. So just follow up then. So I'm hearing, of the schools that won't be addressed, so Wilson did have its roof fixed, which is obviously was a hugely urgent need, so that is, and then what I'm hearing is that Cleveland would be able to have some of its roof needs taken care of in the meantime while that's waiting. And then I totally, and I was reading in the memo and appreciate all that information about the discussion about Jefferson, and I think as it is growing, that it makes sense to be able to say, give it the chance to grow without disrupting and sending kids other places. But will there be any, I know the field and track just went in, which is great. Was there any discussion or information from staff about any sort of interim improvements or anything facility related, given that kind of interim piece? And if we're switching from having master planning at multiple campuses and really focusing on the few, which makes sense to me. It's just, again, that piece of when, the weighting of the decades. So I don't know if CJ had anything to say.
In the improvement project work, work that was identified, the Wilson roof, of course, has already been completed. The
Right.
Cleveland roof then, which will then be completed if in fact it's not slated for consideration in 2016. And some seismic and ADA work at Jefferson has been identified as well in the improvement project work.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I think that's important. I mean, the selection of these three doesn't preclude other things that I mean, we're
Right.
not going
That
to
we need to
ignore
Right.
a
Right.
roof, at least.
Right.
My expectation would be that we wouldn't be ignoring a roof.
Right.
And it's already identified as part of the improvement project work. It's on the high schools. We've simply been, other than Wilson, which was, ranked as one of the top priority roofs in the district needing attention, we've been pushing back the high schools until a determination was made about which ones might be moving forward in 2016, so we would then know how to schedule the work on the balance of the high schools.
Great, thank you.
So you're saying that Cleveland, this work at Cleveland and Jeff will come out of the current bond, not out of a future bond? Is that what
That's
you said?
correct. It's
Okay.
already part of
Great.
the improvement projects and will be scheduled then for the summer of 2016 if this moves forward as recommended.
And CJ, when do we start looking at other kinds of improvements other than just the high schools? These three high schools, is that in 2016 when we start to develop a list?
It would really be either late 2015 or early 2016. We'll know more as we start going through the master planning process with the high schools, with what kind of costs we think we're going to be considering at the high school level. And then also, we always have a list of needs. And so it's a question of us, again, making determinations about relative priorities and if those are going to remain the same. It was predominantly around roof, seismic, and accessibility last time. And in the absence of anything changing between now and then, that seems likely that those would remain the priorities. Only that different schools will be identified because of the work that's already been completed.
And will you remind me how many schools were doing that smaller improvement work on in the district out of our 83, 82 schools?
We've 63.
63,
Mhm.
okay.
And that includes 6 through 8 science classrooms in addition to, which was the educational improvement, in addition to the other
Great.
kind of facility condition issues.
Wonderful, thank you.
I was just gonna mention those pieces, when we figure those out, will be the determining factor in what that second bond actually needs to be, right?
It works both ways. Both the costs can determine the size of the amount of projects we can do. The amount of projects, quite frankly, are in excess of what we know we'd be able to do with a second bond, simply because of the fact that we have a need to go through the entire portfolio. But I have no doubt at all that there will be lively discussion about what's the appropriate tax rate given the need, and what gets left in a potential ballot measure and what gets removed from it in terms of projects.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the feedback I think we got in going out to this previous bond was let the projects guide what you need in terms of the resource, not the resource and then fill the projects up to that point.
And there was actually some conversation in that regard at the Bond Development Committee as regards the 3 high schools even, that there was conversation and information in their material about the fact that they considered should we only be moving forward potentially with 2 high schools based on potential tax rates, and ultimately the committee decided no, they think that we need to be able to maintain the momentum and to move forward with 3, and then to evaluate in 2016 what that's going to look like in terms of the tax rate. So that was an active conversation at the committee last spring.
Great, thank you.
Director Egan?
So I think Director Lyle did a great job of kind of summing up where the committee discussion was. I just wanted to add a couple of things. One was, I think we want to be careful to be talking about these next 3 schools not as these are the ones we're doing, these are the ones we're not doing. We should instead be talking about these are the ones we're doing in 2016, which sets up the fact that we're going to be doing these other 3 in 2020. I mean, we all knew that out of these 6, we had to pick 3.
Right.
So what we really did was we set these 3 for 2016 and these 3 for 2020, and that's really the way we should be presenting it to the community. We have made a commitment that we're going to get through our high schools in the first, 3 bonds. A couple of other things is, I think we decided together that it didn't make sense to do 2 West Side schools in one bond. So we sort of wanted to split those up. It didn't necessarily make sense to do 2 focus schools in one bond, and so we sort of wanted to split that up. And I think that we really were looking at the partnership potential. Even with the partnership potential, what's exciting to think about is that PCC is likely going to be going out for a bond in 2018, and so having Jefferson 2020 might give us some opportunities to be thinking about what the partnership opportunities are with them as they're designing their next bond too, which is kind of fun. And I think the other thing for us to all be keeping in mind is that after we get done with the high schools, the pace of our projects is going to speed up pretty dramatically. Because for what it costs to build a high school now, you could build 2 or 2.5 elementary schools. Or 3. And so, you know, once we get through these 3, all of a sudden, I think we're going to take off in terms of the change that's going to happen in terms of our facilities at Portland Public Schools. So it's really exciting. It's the next one is going to be the big one to talk with voters about. And then from there, hopefully, it'll just be renewals. So.
Any others? Director Bile?
I appreciated, CJ, you bringing up the conversation about that the committee continued to commit to 3 high schools, even though there's some question about rates and inflation about whether or not that rate will make it. And I appreciate, Director Morton, what you were reflecting back of our community process is that part of the challenge, I think, in Bond 1 from the listening sessions that were referenced earlier was it felt like the district picked a number and filled it up. Versus we had very clear criteria about what we were going out for the bond that is now Bond 1, and expecting to do the same thing with Bond number 2. And I just want to note that I have heard some public comments and public input that they're surprised that we're considering Bond number 2. They felt we weren't communicative about that, but I just want to highlight that because I know that penetration of information is really important. So as we continue to talk, make sure that we continue to talk. This is not even just to get through our 9 high schools. This is all of our buildings, and it's a 32-year project. And we have been thoughtful about it and intentional about it. And from what I'm hearing, it's very exciting. Community is very excited about it, and it's been really impressive how we've managed the work so far with what we know is escalating costs because of competition in the market, because other districts are now building as well, which is great for all of us. It does drive market rates up, and so for us to still be on target and on budget is phenomenal, and it's a kudos to you and your team, so I appreciate that. And I also just want to acknowledge a little piece of input that I feel is important just to give voice to, again, back to Jefferson. There was concern, and you mentioned PCC going out for a bond. I just want to acknowledge that some people in the Jefferson community are concerned that PCC will take over the Jefferson campus, that we will somehow cede it to PCC or something like that. And I just want to share from my perspective that I am not interested in that, and that is not something I would consider as a proposal. There are some unique partnership opportunities, but that is not something that I'm interested in. So I just want to acknowledge that because if it's out there in the community, I just want to make sure to address it.
So, you know, there's one final thing I also wanted to say. I think there was a lot of excitement on the committee about Madison, especially with the kind of the outer east side and the fact that Marshall had closed, that we have so much growth there, community is so strong. So I think there was a lot of excitement about having Madison in the mix in this particular bond. So I just want to acknowledge that as well.
Sorry, can I tag on to that one more time? I just also want to acknowledge that most of the people on the committee were recognizing the enrollment trends and understanding that by the time we get through all of our high schools, there may be an opportunity or a need to look at other options. For example, something like opening Marshall campus again. It was originally built to add capacity to the system. And so just recognizing that enrollment trends could very much make that a possibility again if we keep our continuing trend.
It could well be a master plan for the 2024 bond, if in fact that's necessary, or the 2028, or, but that's exactly right. it. We've got that capacity now in order to be able to use it as swing space for our high schools, which is highly valuable to us. And in fact, we're probably going to need it for permanent capacity in the future.
Right. That's right. Others? Anything else? CJ, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item has to do with our legislative priorities. Tonight we'll receive recommendation from the board's ad hoc legislative committee on proposed 2015 state legislative platform. Director Belial is the chair of the committee, which also includes directors Morton and Regan. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce Mr. Williams?
So David Williams, who is our Director of Government Relations, will walk us through the recommended legislative platform. David.
Thank you very much. So you have in your packet a draft 2015 state legislative platform. As was indicated in the memo to the board, this was developed by your board legislative committee over a series of 3 meetings. And you have it before you today for some comment and feedback. I'll very quickly run through the highlights of the document for you, and then you're sort of happy to take any questions about it and see where your comments lie. It's, of course, no secret that a main thrust of our legislative platform for the upcoming session is around school funding, and obviously we really hit it right from the beginning in the document. This is very similar to the document you approved in 2013. But even for somebody who has been doing this for as long as I have, I still find some of the statistics around school funding pretty striking as we look to try to continue to build the investment in education going forward. Particularly of note, the fact that over the time period from 2003 to today, the state budget has grown by 56%, public safety, 52%, public safety by 68%, and human services by 84%, whereas education grew by 34.2%, not even keeping pace with the growth in the state budget. Really tells a more global story about the arc that education funding has been on in the state. So I think it's important to point that out. So then moving from that, we talk about specific sort of legislative priorities. Again, to preface this document is really about creating a framework for us as we go into the legislative session, really establishing the sort of 30,000-foot principles that I will apply and the district will apply in evaluating individual pieces of legislation. So we don't attempt to take specific positions on individual pieces of legislation or policy concepts in this document. What we try to do is inform that process so that we can be nimble during the actual session in taking those positions as the need arises on individual bills. I would remind you that during the session there'll be somewhere upwards of 3,000 or 4,000 pieces of legislation introduced. Probably, it's fair to say about 30% of those affecting public education, so upwards of, say, 1,000 bills affecting public education. We won't position on every single one of those 1,000, because most of them won't even get a public hearing or get any consideration, so we obviously want to position ourselves when valuable and when we can have an impact on specific bills. So that's the process we use during the legislative session. So you have a section that we sort of title Student Achievement. We talk about some of our high priorities, talking as well about some of the state's sort of public policy, education policy initiatives globally, obviously speaking to things like the work of the OEIB and some of the concepts that have come out of that around sort of strategic initiatives, and looking at the value of that sort of work going forward. We do talk about any sort of education reform proposals should not come in. We talk about that in the, I believe that's the 3rd bullet point under there. Any specific reform should not come at the expense of overall education funding. So really looking for any reforms to be additive to the system, not disruptive underneath the base kind of thing. As well, we have a bullet point talking about sort of lifelong learners and CTE connectedness, as well as higher ed connectedness, things like expanded options and other such programs in there as well, and support for that. We come back to education funding, and we have, again, quite a few specifics in here. I will call out for the viewer, we do in the state have something called the Quality Education Model, which tells us really how much is needed to actually reach It's actually to reach 90% of students reaching standards, and obviously we have in the state the 40-40-20 goal, which an underlying factor of that, if you do the math, is 100% of all students graduating from high school. So this 90% requirement, standard level, the QEM says we would need $9.158 billion in this next biennium to reach that goal. I think it's fair to say we are looking at something in the range of $7 billion as the likely outcome of the session. So still a very significant gap when it comes to actually funding towards that outcome going forward. We also have in here a bullet point around the state school distribution fund formula and how we will weigh proposals in that. There is also always in every session a number of proposals dealing with how we distribute the money regardless of how much that money is. So we do talk about how we will weigh that and evaluate those proposals individually on their merits. I have simply copy and pasted all of the resolution bullet points from the resolution you adopted this summer on the Smarter Balance Assessment as they relate to the work of the state legislature. So you'll see those copied in their entirety right there. Then we have a section called School District Operations, which looks at more of the operational side of the district, talking about some of the cost drivers that we deal with in the district, things like employee salary and wages and health benefits and the like underneath there. Then we go to the last section, which I call Other Areas of Legislative Interest, which is just a smattering of some of the more global topics that we anticipate will come up in a legislative session, or that we also conversely want to highlight specifically. Things in this, for instance, the first bullet point, as we point out, PPS supports targeted efforts that would benefit the district and or the other similarly situated school districts. As we know, Portland fits a fairly unique spot in Oregon education, being both the largest district in the state and the most urban district in the state. So there are a number of initiatives that we work on throughout the session that are sort of uniquely impactful to large school districts in Oregon, which of course there's on one hand we can count those. And a number of other bullet points about supporting our community partners, supporting the work of the city and the county where they intersect with the district, and supporting our state partners as well where their legislative agendas align. As you know, in a session we do work very strongly in coalition with any and all willing partners who will work for greater focus on education. And with that, I'd be happy to sort of field questions about this too.
Dr. Buell?
Can you look at this last section under student achievement? It says a key component of lifelong, that's the start of it?
Yeah.
Down towards the bottom, it talks about CTE, and it says that we strongly support additional state investments outside of the state school fund.
Right.
I was looking through this, in looking through this document, that's only CTE, because you and I were both at the OEIB meeting, and they have last year, or 2 years ago, Governor had $75 million that he was spending for his priorities, which came out of, it only comes in two places, right? It comes from the federal, or it comes from the state money. State money is Common School Fund. Is that pretty close to correct? I mean, and so he was spending $75 million of the state Common School Fund for his stuff. Well, this year, as you and I, you and FOMO, he's spending $870 million, which for us, at 7%, so we're about 7% of the state, correct?
About 8%.
That's 600 FTE of ours that he's spending someplace else that aren't going to get into our classrooms. And so, did we take that into account in our legislative session? I mean, are we saying, no, that's too much money out of the state school? Because that's got to come out of the state school fund. There's no place else to get it. That he's getting it. He's getting it there, right? Including the third grade reading initiative, which is $400 million, which is $28 million. He's spending that on actually preschool, and is that did you know, is that part of the kindergarten? Is it, because a couple $100 million of that is the kindergarten initiative? Is that beyond what they're planning to give, or is that what they're planning to give? See, you see what I'm saying? I don't know where that separates out, and we should be, if it's beyond it, we should be fighting it. And we should be standing up and saying, $870 million out there is too much, 600 of our FTE out someplace in the hinterlands. I mean, it's not that it's not good stuff that he's doing. I think it's good stuff. I'm not against what he's doing. It's just, that's a chunk of change, $870 million.
It's only a
So-
chunk of change if it comes out of what we currently get.
Well, there's
It
no
would be
place else
great
it
if
could
he would
come
just
from, though.
add another
Yeah.
out of the state
Yeah,
budget. Now
yeah.
that, I
Yeah.
could get
Is he
behind
gonna-
that.
Is he gonna do that? I don't know. Do you know, David? I don't know.
So,
Figure it out.
a little bit on the process, which I think is informative in this specific instance. So the governor will release his actual budget on December 1st. The document that was put out at the OEIB meeting previously was informative, for sure, but it lacked a significant amount of detail for us to know exactly what some
Yeah,
of
I
those
couldn't figure
expenditures
it
were.
out.
I would point out that a couple $100 million of what we know on that document were what I would describe formula changes that are merely reallocations of existing dollars. Of specifically the $400 million you refer to as the third grade reading early childhood, he did call out $220 million as a way to pay for the move to full day kindergarten.
Yeah.
That's positive, but again, we don't know any details below that. How is that money being distributed? How is it
But
getting
does
out?
it pay for it? Is 200 the right number?
So what we have been advocating for the sort of broader coalition is about $250 million to pay for the move to full day kindergarten. Yes, and so to give you the sense, these are not firmed up and final numbers as we go into session, and but what we are generally looking at is what we begin by advocating for is what we call the true roll-up. So how much will it cost to run the education enterprise over the next 2 years, the same as we're running it now, okay? Because we gotta keep people employed and keep moving forward. And we estimate that statewide to be about $7.3 billion. Okay, so we're at 6.65 right now. So 7.3, then add 200 to 250 million on top of that to pay for full day kindergarten. So I think generally our approach would be that you have to begin from that as your starting point. Then if we want to have discussions about valuable strategic initiatives, no matter whether they're coming from the OEIB, the governor, or individual legislators, because they will all have good ideas, but we need to talk about them in the context of adding on top of the existing system as we move forward. We can't merely carve out from below those numbers to sort of redefine the system, right?
And that's
So-
in here.
Are we good on, was that legislative committee good on all that? Because I'm good on all that, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's,
So exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Director Atkins?
and I think the other piece of that too is not only should it not be carving out the existing money, and then mandating exactly how it should be spent, and then requiring additional compliance and reporting, which in itself has cost added, right? And puts limitations on local districts and what they view as the highest, most effective strategies versus having the OEIB or whoever say, well, we want you to make sure you spend, X% or X, $1 million on this strategy or this particular approach, and you need to report on it and do all this other, hire people in order to report on it, right? I mean, so I'm really concerned about this direction. Accountability, yes, but when it comes in the form of these mandates, not a recognition that we need to have, if we want to do innovative pilots, try new things, again, do it on top of. The other piece too I wanted to ask about, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the quality education model. It is in the state constitution, correct?
Correct.
And what it says in the state constitution is that the legislature, in effect, it says the legislature will fund the quality education model, which, as you pointed out, is about $9 billion, a couple $1 billion above where the state currently chooses to invest in our kids. It needs to do that or issue a report saying why it isn't going to. Is that basically what the Constitution says?
That is basically correct. There actually was a very interesting court case a number of years ago about I think the Constitution uses the word and instead of or when it comes to writing the report. And a number of school districts sued the state saying you're not off the hook for funding. You have to fund, and the report is a nice little touch, but you have to fund the system. If I remember correctly, essentially the court said, you're probably right, But we as a court don't have any jurisdiction to hold, say, the legislature in contempt. So there really was nothing they could do about it.
So who would have that jurisdiction?
Dave, do you want to clarify?
That's okay, go ahead.
Well, I'll start by stating the obvious. I'm not a lawyer. But we pursued this at one point to decide whether or not there were some changes we could make. And I think I just heard Director Knowles say under her breath that this is a current court ruling. It is a judicial interpretation of the law,
Right.
which says something to the effect of you shall fund education. They're very clear that that is a demand and a command and an expectation of the state. But when the voters approved the amendment to the Constitution, there was language in there that said something to the effect of, if you can't fund it, you must issue a report. And so they didn't feel they had the authority to re-legislate that. They said that there are two opposing viewpoints in that, and so they try their best to interpret voter intent. And what they said is in that amendment, it seemed that voters anticipated that there could be an opportunity to not fund at that level, and so gave the legislature basically an out, a way to do it. And so that's where we left the conversation. There is nothing saying that there couldn't be a change to that Constitution again or another amendment. And I'll just say publicly that I'd be happy to work with anybody and everybody, including our teachers union, to work on putting forth some kind of constitutional amendment that would correct that, because I believe the people of the state of Oregon are interested in funding education at the state required rate.
You're here.
So we could include that in our legislative priorities then. Yes, definitely. Yeah, yes.
We can, and certainly as the institution, we can bring constitutional amendments to the legislature, and we have. We've brought several constitutional amendments previously trying to work on reforms to the state's property tax system. Of course, the caveat being, once something is certified for the ballot, we as an institution will bow out of the process of that. I would note ballot measure 1, which was the ballot measure approving that, was championed and pushed through during Governor Kitzhaber's first term in office.
Correct. Okay. Other comments? Director Buell?
Two major things. The first one you covered, I appreciate the way the board dealt with it, because I think it's correct. The second one is something we need to deal with too. And if you look at the very last thing on the report, the draft report, it says PPS supports efforts to ensure that when any data is collected and stored about students, it is done reliably and securely, and that such data is only used for legitimate educational purposes. We need to look at that as a district. Besides this, 2 weeks ago, the Oregon Employment Division had 850,000 of their people have their data breached. 850,000. We are handing our data down to the state, the people who could not protect the even 850,000 people's Social Security number. They can't protect it. They cannot protect our children's data, period. They've proven that in this breach. If you can't protect that, how can you protect our children's data? And so the state is asking us to send down all of our children's data on the longitudinal database, which they can't protect. And you know what we should really do, really seriously? This is almost a serious thing. We should write a letter to every parent in our school district, or an email that says, we are taking your child's data and we are going to hand it to criminals. Because that's exactly what happened with all the unemployment data, and it's exactly what can happen to all of our data. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand about this data thing with children is that the children's data is much more valuable than adults because it's clean. You have clean data. So your child can have their data stolen and it can go on for several years. So when Mr. Morton's son gets to college, all of a sudden they find out he's got a record in Wyoming and he owes $3,000 in Texas.
A
I mean,
while ago.
no, it's how it really works. So he can't get into the college that he wants because he's got a felony record someplace. It's just craziness, and we're just saying to the state, take our kids' data and give it to criminals. And basically, that's what happened with the employment data, and it's basically what we are doing when we send them our children's data. So we need to have our people look at it, and we need to go down to the legislature and say, I'm sorry, we're not going to hand you our children's data to turn over to criminals, because that's exactly what we're doing. And we need to figure out what we can do about that, because it's a terrible thing if it happens. There's between 600 and 700,000 kids in Oregon, and we're handing their data to criminals. Good luck on that. And it's just wrong, and we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. And so I like this part about saying this, but it's stronger than this. It's a really important thing for our school board to look at and say, hey, we need to quit it.
Well, I'm glad that you included that within the priorities, all those of you on the committee.
So it was a discussion that we had, and also very concerned about it. If I'm remembering our discussion correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I also remember us discussing is that the reality in today's world is that being able to protect somebody's data is really challenging. FBI gets hacked, CIA gets hacked,
everybody gets
banks
hacked.
get hacked,
We're
right?
handing
And
the
so,
data to criminals.
so we chose not to, and I just want to point out that if somebody's data is stolen, such as the state's or any individuals, that doesn't make them criminal. It makes the person that actually
That's what I'm
attacked.
talking about. We're actually handing it to criminals because they can't protect it.
Right.
And so
I'm
we
just-
say, well, if they can protect it, we want to make sure they can protect it. Well, I'm sorry, they can't protect it. They've already proved that. So let's not give it to them.
Right, so I guess what our discussion was is that our district, state, whoever has the data, it has been shown that it's really challenging to protect it. So what we wanted to make sure is that we were advocating for policies and procedures that take into account, because lots of students are on devices, iPads, Chromebooks, all of this stuff, and many people are starting to use technology applications, and they all have clauses about what they can do with student data, what data they're collecting, and then they market it and sell it and all of those pieces. And so we took that tack. I'd be curious if other people are interested. I'm not sure what we can do to protect data anymore, because again, everybody
Not
is-
give it to 'em.
but we then is on the hook as the state, I guess, was our part of our discussion, is that protecting data is a challenge, and we do as best we can, as will the state. But what we were trying to do with the legislative is to say, let's be realistic about all the data. For example, if we are sending them, we don't want it to go to a company who then sells it to a third party, who then markets to our children, or something like that. And so we took that tack, but if other folks are interested
Yeah,
in
and
doing-
this is I think this is probably the best tack you're going to take. Lou Frederick probably will have a bill that deals with data. I hope we're really very supportive of it, and we work
I'm
with
supportive,
Lou on it.
and I hope that he actually goes even farther, because I think that I think it could benefit from even more stringent.
Oh, well, they should not have a state longitudinal database that in any way identifies any of our children. That's where they should go. If they want to get disaggregated data that's aggregated, and we send this, and that's not, but it's where we send actual information which identifies our children. We should not be they shouldn't even be asking us to do that, because it's wrong, because they can't protect it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Matt, I think was first, and then,
Do you have
Sure.
a comment? Great.
Yeah, I had a chance to sit on the committee as well, and I want to recognize David and his work and his insight, keeping his finger on the pulse of what's happening statewide. I think the reality of this is that in many ways it's our opportunity to create a real partisan document to say this is about us as a district. But the other balance of that is that it also takes into consideration what we see in terms of the need across the state, which I think that's an important balance to strike. The other piece, real quickly too, is that as we make this available, the intention and the attitude as we go and prepare for Salem is to every partner, parent, student, advocate that we can gather with us. I hope we pursue that, whether that is
Right.
COSA or OSBA or the governor's office or elected officials in Salem, or our teachers, our PAT, our OEA, and so on. These are all folks that the voice amplifies more and more when we have an opportunity to speak together. And I think things like the funding level can continue to be chipped away, as we saw in the last session. So, and that's a credit that I think everyone can take to some extent. So I appreciated the opportunity to, and I think this document, just my perception being on the committee, this document outlines a lot of that partisan work, but also the balance of what the state needs.
Thank you. Others? Dr.
I
Regan?
had a couple of questions. So I was also on this committee, and I had an exchange with David today about one area where it seemed like we had not included a piece, and that had to do with the fifth-year student issue. So could you go ahead and address how we're going to deal with that, or
Yes.
maybe explain to people what we're talking about?
Thank you. So at one of our meetings, we did talk about putting in here a priority around the growing use of the fifth-year senior programs, where students who have effectively graduated from high school, the district withholds their diploma and allows them to attend a nearby college, and they continue to collect state school fund dollars to pay for that student. So we did a bullet point, and I apologize, it was not in this draft. It will be in the final as it goes forward. I can read it here for you right now. I just have it right in front of me. We say there's a current movement among school districts to create 5-year high school diploma programs that include a 5th year solely for post-secondary enrollment. PPS believes that the state should establish a dedicated source of funds to invest in these programs so as not to dilute the state school fund, but rather provide students with no cost or low cost access to higher education.
Great. Thank you. And this is a practice that's expanding around Oregon, and so I think it's important that we have something in here. So so thank you for that. And then I also wanted to mention two other things as we go forward. David, I'm hoping that you are going to be organizing an opportunity for us to be meeting with Portland area legislators to go through this with them prior to the legislative session. We usually do that, right?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So that really also is the next task for the legislative committee is after they've done great work on developing this, they now launch into the phase of developing an advocacy plan, which means something I'll write up for them to then work on and approve, and work on doing sort of concerted advocacy both in December and January, and then once session starts in February throughout the legislative session. As I would anticipate some of the things that would be in there, as we did 2 years ago, we did a fairly robust legislative briefing for as many of the PPS area legislators as possible, came here to the building with board members and staff to go through the legislative platform. We had, if you recall, specific legislators come during the session to your board meetings and address specific issues as they arose. I think we had Senator Devlin, the co-chair of Ways and Means. We had Senator Dembro come and talk about what was going on in the Education Committee. So we will probably continue that similar practice, as well as outreach days where members of the board come down to Salem. Last year we had a very great day in Salem where we had board members, Superintendent Smith, as well as folks from PAT join us for some group meetings in Salem where we really pushed hard on education funding. That was, I believe, around the President's Day rally, which usually happens in Salem. So a lot of those similar activities will happen this coming session and are always very effective in moving our message.
And then
David,
there
I
was-
had I was very impressed around the last legislative session with a program that they had out in Beaverton. And I'm not sure if they partnered with the PTA. I think they did, but it was more an educational program where they did a review of exactly where the money comes from for the legislature and then where it goes, to give parents in the community a better idea about what school funding's all about. Where does the money come from for our schools? And I think that they had a lot of success with just educating their community around that. But would you check into that program? I think they did it with their PTA and with their foundation, I think, were the two partners. that the district used to do that. And they had huge turnouts for those. They did 2 of them, so.
So, can I just do my final?
Another one? Okay.
So my final one is, I appreciate the statements in here about us working with our statewide education partners, and I know that you ran this past Association of Teachers and some other groups in Coalition of Communities of Color, COSA, a variety of different groups. So, and I also appreciate that you mentioned that we're also going to be supporting the efforts of the City of Portland, Multnomah County, and Metro, neighboring school districts, and the rest, as that makes sense for us to kind of partner together with them. My question is, I know that you focus, your primary focus is on the state legislature. You also do some federal work. In terms of the city and the county and the metro, and when they're have an item on their agenda that is of interest to us, I'm still trying to understand who's following those agendas, so that if the county has a budget item related to healthcare clinics or Sun schools, or the city has something related to SROs, we can be sure that we are participating as appropriate in those efforts. Or if they are going to the legislature and lobbying on something that impacts us, how we do that together. So is that you, or is that John? Who's kind of coordinating the city, county, other entity roles?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question, and you know, what we do try to do is weigh in where appropriate. I know, for instance, the city's going to be discussing the street fee this week, and we've been working with them in the development, and we'll be presenting some words of support around investments that the city is making based on that when they meet on Thursday. Given the scope of the work of the legislature, it is certainly and fairly where we invest the vast majority of our time, because that the work that they do is both 70 or 80% of our budget, as well as probably 80% of our sort of operating life as a district is encompassed in statute. So I just think that that's where you see the bulk of that work, is that scope. Where appropriate and where issues arise as needed, I think that's when we tackle those with the county and the city, both as our efforts can align in Salem, although generally when they align in Salem, it's around the city and the county wanting to support our efforts. For instance, the mayor of Portland 2 years ago organized a big sort of mayor's education day in Salem, and it was mostly a call-in thing, but we supported their efforts and tried to help them as they educated mayors about education funding. Where there are specific budget items in the city's budget and the county's budget, we just try to impact that as much as we can. I think it's fair to say that the city and the county have been great partners and do view us as excellent partners, and so generally they reach out to us on a fairly informal level up and down the organization, you know, where appropriate based on the issue at hand, you know, whether that be in facilities, you know, if it's around a planning issue or some such, whether it's, you know, at sort of our level, if it's something more global like the street fee, or whether it's, you know, something specific program-based that intersects some other area of the organization.
I guess I want to make sure that we have the opportunity when our great partners are devoting money that impacts us in a positive way. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to be at their meetings and to thank them for that, or to suggest tweaks or whatever it might be. And I just want to make sure we don't miss those opportunities as we go. So I want to make sure somebody's paying, because I know that David spends a lot of time in Salem during the session, but I want to make sure somebody else is following the other agenda so that we can be a presence.
I think we can always do better with that. John is doing some of that with the city bureaus, and we do an informal get together with the mayor on a regular basis, kind of checking where are our common, you know, what are the things we're working on together, or how are we supporting each other. And David just described it well in terms of there's a lot of interface with facilities. David and John do some tag teaming, and we can always be better at paying attention to this. I think you guys also scan things, and we'll bring it to our attention too. So keep doing that.
You know, and I think it's fair to say that there's at times a bandwidth issue as well, especially say during a legislative session when so much of my specific effort is devoted down in Salem with the work going on there. So
Yes.
it will ebb and flow as we have an ability to engage in those based on the bandwidth.
Director Buell?
Two specific, one comment kind of, and then a real specific question on a little section here that I don't understand exactly, and I want to make sure it's clear. And then I have one other comment. We say we support the priorities of the Oregon School Board Association. Okay, I've looked at those. They're not too bad. They're pretty good and so on. But the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators, I don't know what those are. And a lot of times I question those. So I'm not so sure that we should be saying that we're supporting their priorities unless they're also mixing with our priorities. I don't know exactly how they mix up. I haven't studied it enough to know, so I just had that reservation on this.
David, do you have a copy of what they're proposing that you
So,
could distribute to us?
What you see with OSBA and COSA are two different approaches to legislative advocacy. OSBA, as you will have in your
I read all
packet,
their stuff.
their specific legislative policies and priorities. COSA takes a much more subjective approach, and they don't actually approve a formal legislative platform for the legislative session and remain as a more nimble, focused shop. And I think to a degree, they maintain a greater degree of connectedness with their membership base, specifically the superintendent base among that organization, so to be a sort of constant sounding board for their advocacy efforts. If there was a specific thing that you think we as an institution would have a big problem with that COSA would do, I certainly welcome you to raise that. I
Testing,
would note that in that
opting
bullet
out.
point, we do say that's where our issues do align, which for all of our statewide partners, OSBA, COSA, OEA, OSCA, Oregon PTA, I would say the overlap is probably in the 90 to 95% range.
Pam points out that it says common goals and priorities, which, yeah, okay. So I got the draft on it, and I missed that a little bit, but yeah, okay. Well,
That's
I wanted
more
to
about working in
highlight
process.
that. So, and maybe we should add the OEA in with that. We have 3,000 teachers in that organization, so we should be supporting a lot of their stuff where they overlap too, of course. Well, I go back to this one sentence, and I have one more comment, and that'll be it, I think. This one, it says, it's on the legislative priorities, second to last paragraph, right above where it says other areas of legislative interest. It's the second one that starts out, PPS supports the creation.
I'm sorry, I was making a note. Help me out again. Where
Okay, it's
Last
the
page.
It's
Okay,
the last
second
page,
paragraph.
second
I see.
paragraph down.
Yep.
And it is this sentence, and I want to know which way to read this sentence. PPS supports statewide efforts to encourage local collaboration and development of metrics for including student achievement growth in evaluations. And my understanding is that as a school board, we talked about it, that we're not for that, having student achievement growth in evaluations. That was kind of in our Common Core thing. That was my understanding. So I'm not sure. Are we supporting this, or what? And so should this sentence read: PPS supports statewide efforts to encourage local collaboration and local development of metrics, or are we actually supporting the development of metrics for including student achievement growth and evaluations? Which way is that sentence supposed to be read?
So I read it as encourage local collaboration and local development of metrics.
Okay.
I think our goal in this
We're
is.
on, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think our goal in
I
this
just
is.
wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Okay,
When there
great.
are statewide efforts around teacher
Yeah.
evaluation, we want to maintain as much local flexibility as
Right,
possible.
exactly. Okay, and the last thing is, I think we have to be careful with we're using as a board and as an administration and as a district, really, the word achievement gap, and we're not really defining it exactly correct, and I think it'd be a good idea if we would at least think about it, because the achievement gap, is it the gap on the testing, or is it the gap on the reading? From my point of view, it's the gap on the reading, that what we want is all of our children to read at grade level. The testing thing is different, and it's becoming even more different with the SBAC testing. So I'm not sure which achievement gap that we want to push on. One or the other. Mathematics might be better with it, but the SBAC is also changing the way that we're looking at mathematics, of course, and it's becoming more, can you write about mathematics than can you do mathematics? which is questionable. There's a lot of questionable things around that. So I just wanted to bring that out, that when we say achievement gap, do we mean the testing, or do we mean the reading and the foundational mathematics skills, or what? We just use it loosely, and there's a huge difference between the two things. I just wanted to point that out for something to think about as a board. So I appreciate you listening to me on that.
Others? Director Atkins?
Yeah, I think just one comment to that piece. I mean, I feel like we've been using the term opportunity gap.
Yeah, I like opportunity gap.
Because it's not just about test scores, it's also about reading graduation rate, it's about opportunities in all different ways.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to David and to the legislative committee for your work. This is outstanding and really appreciate it, and I'm really excited about moving forward and advocating strongly in Salem and with all our community to keep I know we've been in there in the trenches for decades, some of us, and we've got to all keep pushing because our kids deserve it.
Anybody else? So Director Blau?
I just wanted to highlight two other things, but before I get there, I wanted to ask, we had talked at one point about encouraging the state to locally allow for bonding authority for buildings, for facilities, as we just had our bond earlier, to help leverage additional funds so it doesn't rest on local communities. And I don't see it again in this draft, but I know it was in one draft, so. Just a placeholder if it's not there. I would assume that we would support. I know it fits perfectly on 4 pages, but if it's not there, to include
I hate to bring
and
it to you, it'll be
encourage.
5 pages when you get it back.
That's all right. The second thing is I just wanted to highlight two things that I'm really also encouraged by. Is one is our position that we don't support the state moving to a statewide collective bargaining, a statewide salary schedule. We believe, again, that's a local control issue for us to be working with our staff. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge that we're also advocating for statewide funding for outdoor school. When I hear Director Morton talk about a balance between local and statewide, to bring those opportunities, and I know we'll have a budget discussion about this, but really this is, I think, a statewide ethos about environmental education, and it should really come as a statewide opportunity. So.
Could I ask
Director Buell?
When I talked to at least one union person about this particular paragraph, they would say, we're in favor of collective bargaining, right, as a board.
Right.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to get that out in public to make sure that that was the case, because it edges around a little bit here. It's not quite as strong a statement as, hey, we're for, yes, we don't want you to, in there.
Great with collective bargaining, don't think the state should meddle in it.
Yes, good, that's good, okay.
Anybody else? Okay, great. What a great discussion. Wait for Bobby to get back here. So we'll move on to our next agenda item. We're fortunate that Director Regan serves on the OSBA board and is the president-elect of that board. So I'd like to, OSBA, I should say Oregon School Boards Association, rather than just OSBA, for everybody who doesn't know what that stands for. So I'd like to ask her to provide us with a brief overview of the OSBA ballot, and the board will vote on this at our next meeting on November 25th.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Dr. Regan?
So technically, I'm still vice president of the Oregon School Boards Association, but in January, I'll be president-elect.
Okay.
There's a series of resolutions that we're going to be looking at voting on. So I think we're just going to introduce those this week, and then we actually will vote next week.
Correct.
And the other thing that we wanted to do tonight is to introduce the Promise of Oregon campaign and show the new full 3.5-minute video associated with that. So first of all, I just wanted to first start by just saying the Oregon School Boards Association is a statewide association, and it supports school board members as we seek to improve student achievement. And there are school board members now in 197 districts across Oregon. And it's helpful to reflect that most of those are very small and very rural school districts. There's only 10 or 12 school districts in Oregon that have more than one high school. So when you're talking about a statewide association supporting that, you need to understand that, Portland Public Schools is the only urban district, and then there's only 9 or 10 others that have more than one high school. So you're an association that's supporting all of those. So OSBA as an organization provides services, direct services to many of our smaller districts. It partners with education organizations statewide to lobby for public education generally, and it provides tools, resources, and professional development for volunteer elected school board members across the state. So in terms of the several resolutions we're going to look at, the first one is a resolution that supports the Promise of Oregon campaign. And just so you know what that is, at last weekend's Oregon School Boards Association annual convention, we actually participated in a workshop to help board members understand what this campaign is all about and how they can use it to change the conversation in Oregon around public education and around our students. And so I first of all wanted to thank John Isaacs, if he's still here, so Director of Communications and Family Engagement, and I also wanted to thank Mina J. Oswald, our student representative, for participating with me and others in that workshop. It was really fun, and it was really exciting to have a student voice in that conversation as well. So I have wanted the Oregon School Boards Association to do a public relations campaign around public education for a long, long time, and so it's so exciting to see the organization, the whole organization come together and embrace it, and I just give them huge credit, and I'm so grateful for this campaign. And part of the reason we wanted to do this is because today media is often focused on the most sensational stories or the most negative stories out there. And the question is, who's telling the positive stories about public education and our kids and why it matters? So, generally the tone of the messages seems to be often, public education, public employees, public school teachers are bad, we should privatize public schools, public retirement benefits are too generous. You even have stories now about kids and how lazy they are and that you move to Portland to retire. I mean, it's just such negative portrayal of our kids. And of public schools in general, and even positive stories often end up sounding negative in the media, or at least the headlines come off negative. And the example I gave was a couple of years ago, the Oregonian did an article that basically had a headline about how Washington State beat Oregon again in terms of ACT scores for our high school students. Well, it turns out once you read the article, you realize that Washington State was first in the nation in terms of ACT scores, and Oregon was second. And so the headline could have been, the Northwest or Oregon, Washington take first and second place, but instead it was, if all you read was the headline, you would have thought Oregon was just doing horrible. And so it's trying to just kind of turn that conversation around a little bit, and to talk more positively. So we know, in fact, that we will invest in our kids. The conversation really is whether or not we want to invest early in public education, which often and always is less expensive than investing later in human services or, welfare, or even in public safety, which is a much more expensive way that you invest. So if we all accept that we're going to invest, it would probably be smart for us to look at that. And then the other thing I think that we all need to be thinking about is whether or not we look at public education as an expense, or whether we look at it as an investment. If you look at public education as an expense, you're going to make really short-term decisions and try to spend as little as possible. If you look at it as an investment, you're going to look at much more in the long term, and you're going to make smarter decisions as you go. And so, again, that's the conversation we want to change at the state legislature and even among ourselves. And so what the Promise of Oregon campaign is about a $250,000 investment that the Oregon School Boards Association is making to try to begin to change that conversation. And again, obviously, the hope is to help us all understand that our kids are worthy of the investment. So I wanted to see if we could just first run the 3-minute video now, and then we'll talk about the resolutions that are coming forward.
I am the Promise of Oregon because I'm gonna do so many things when I grow up. I want to build bridges so cars can go over them and under them. I want to be a gardener and make more air in the world. Yo quiero excavar la tierra por civilizaciones ancianas. I want to be a painter and paint everything and travel the world. I want to find a way to make people not be allergic to peanut butter. I'm the Promise of Oregon because I'm gonna stop bullying and have everyone be friends. I forgot what I was gonna say. I'm the Promise of Oregon because when I grow up, I'm gonna get a scholarship, go to college, learn about endangered species, and save those endangered species. I would like to take after my dad and be a great electrician. I'm gonna swim across an ocean. I'm gonna own my own tow truck company. I'm the Promise of Oregon because I'm gonna make Oregon more green. I either want to be a missionary or a comedian. I want to be just like my mom.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm the Promise of Oregon because I want to help people bring babies into the world. I want to help premature babies like my brother Logan. Help children who have heart problems.
And help people understand different cultures better.
I want to stop diabetes. I'm gonna be the mail lady.
I'm the Promise of Oregon because I want to teach people that their milk doesn't just come from the grocery store.
I want to change people's lives with music and theater.
This sounds kind of nerdy, but I want to be a physicist.
I'm gonna discover something unknown in the deep reaches of outer space.
I am the Promise of Oregon because I want to show my passion through lyrical dance. I'm going to teach agriculture education because without agriculture, we'd all be naked and hungry.
I'm going to win the gold medal in the 200 meter in the 2020 Olympics.
I'm going to be the first person to pole vault on the moon.
I hope to influence Oregon public policy and get involved in politics.
I want to start a new family tradition by earning a college degree.
I'm going to bring more technical style to free skiing.
I want to put an end to cancer so people like my grandma don't have to suffer.
I want to write books that will take people to whole new worlds.
I'm the Promise of Oregon because I'm going to keep asking the questions that bring about change.
I will stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves.
I will fight for laws that will protect the environment.
I want to design buildings that are good for the environment.
I'm going to work for the right to equal opportunity for people of color and women.
I want to provide aid to people in third world countries.
I'm going to report stories from around the world.
I want to make people happy every day.
3, 2, 1.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm the Promise of Oregon. Yes, I'm the Promise of Oregon.
Yes, I am the Promise of Oregon.
So Bobby, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, and maybe you don't know the answer, but $250,000 is what's the main vehicle for how they're going to spend it? How we're going to get that message out?
So first of all, just to make this video, they ended up visiting 25 to 30 different school districts across Oregon so that it would really represent the whole state. They're going to be providing a variety of literature out to districts, posters, that sort of thing, thumb drives with this medium on it. And the real focus of the campaign is to have a really strong social media presence with the hope that people will send in pictures of their own kids that say I'm the Promise of Oregon, or that we will take pictures of ourselves holding up signs like this, I'm keeping the Promise of Oregon. It's really to spread the word, and then to, you know, as we get into the legislative session, we'll be targeting that even more as we go. So it'll be a whole variety of different mediums like this that we'll be seeing over the next couple of months.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And if you didn't notice, Mina was in that video. And OSBA did do some filming in the Portland School District, which is great. Every day on the website for Promise of Oregon, they're putting out a new Promise of Oregon kid that's being featured. And again, I would really encourage you
to like the Facebook page for the Promise of Oregon, and there's also a website for the Promise of Oregon that gives you things that you can print out yourself like this, and would show the 3-minute video. I put the 3-minute video up on my own webpage, and I've had 8 shares already in the last couple of days. So it's just trying to spread the word ourselves that we view our kids as worthy of the investment and truly being the promise. This is what's going to take us all forward. So it's pretty exciting. I'm just excited that we have a school board association that is so engaged in this way and in supporting us and supporting our legislative agenda. So one of the resolutions that we are going to be asked to vote on next week is simply a resolution in support of the Promise of Oregon campaign. So hopefully that one's pretty straightforward. Another resolution that we're going to be looking at is, we just heard from David on the OSBA legislative policies and priorities on Portland's. And we also have information here, a draft of the Oregon School Boards Association legislative policies and priorities. And my guess is we might do a little bit of discussion tonight on these if anyone has questions. But why don't I just run through really quickly what the other resolutions are real quick. We will be voting on candidates for the OSBA board, and so a couple of years ago OSBA changed the way they do elections so that instead of it being a statewide election to the OSBA board, regions are actually selecting our own board members. And so in Multnomah County we have 3 board members on the OSBA board. In my seat, I'm running unopposed, and we have, in position 19, we have 2 people running, recommending Doug Montgomery, who is on the Multnomah County ESD for that role. He's been serving for 1 cycle, 2 years. He's done a really nice job. He went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied with us. He's really focused on the needs of special ed kids and trying to get nurses into all of our schools. He's got a real passion around kind of the safety net and social services issues, and I highly recommend him again for the board. There's 2 other quick resolutions that are more housekeeping kind of resolutions for OSBA itself. One is, but they're constitutional changes, so they have to be voted on by the membership. One is we have a couple of districts around Oregon, and especially in really rural outlying areas where it's hard sometimes to find folks to step up into the board. If we don't find someone to volunteer to step up to run, we don't want to leave the position vacant, and so we're proposing that as a last resort we could appoint somebody from adjacent districts. So again, you have that rural representation on the board. That tends to be where we find it the most. And I think the final resolution was just, again, a housekeeping change where we had some old language about the way we used to pass resolutions and the way we used to elect board members, where we voted statewide at the annual conference, and instead we now vote within our own boards after the annual conference and regionally. So those are the resolutions. I don't think I've left any off. I'd love to just open it up for comment.
So, comments on, let's start with the Promise of Oregon comments. That's a resolution for us. Any comments on the resolution? Okay. And then we also have the OSBA legislative agenda comments from board members on that. I think David covered a little bit of it that's the same, pieces that are common for us. So anybody have any questions on that?
And by the way, these are put together by a group of 38 school board members from around the state. So each region has a school board member and a legislative policy committee member. The legislative policy committee is all of those combined. So it's this represents the work of 38 different school board members from around the entire state.
That's great.
Yep.
Director Buell?
One of the places I disagree with their legislative policies and priorities is supporting the continuation of the OEIB. They do have conditions, but the conditions aren't strong enough in my opinion. And also the achievement compacts. I don't think the achievement compacts are doing any good in this for anybody, really. And so it's on legislative policy, section 4. No, I don't want to make suggestions or anything, I just wanted to kind of highlight both of those that were things that, it'd be nice if the OSBA would get behind and help them straighten up the OEIB, because it's such a mess, instead of saying, well, okay, little things, put a parent on it. Yeah, they have parents on it, and I'm for putting a school board member, a parent on it, but they have parents on it. There are people that are parents. Nicole Mayer brought her baby a couple times. She's a parent. I mean, you know, it's just such a weird setup anyhow. Thank you.
Other comments? Dr. Bilal, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to reflect back. I thought I heard you say for a minute, put a parrot, not a parent. I was like, oh, that's
They
a new
already
twist
have
on it.
14 parrots on
Put
the
a bird
thing.
on it. I don't know.
They have 14 parrots on there. They just keep parroting cliches back and forth day after day down there. So I don't know.
Well, it
Okay,
is
other
interesting
comments?
to think that the OEIB actually does have to be reinstated this year. It expires unless it's affirmatively reinstated, and so that's gonna be a really interesting.
Certainly worth considering.
Conversation, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see some investment.
Don't see anything else. Other comments? Okay, Bobby, thank you so much for both the stuff on the Promise of Oregon and your work on the Oregon School Boards Association. We appreciate you representing us there, and thank you. So, I think that's it for tonight. The next meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, November 25th, where we'll vote both on the Oregon School Boards Association, and are we coming back and voting on our legislative priorities that night as well? That's what I thought. So, we are adjourned.